Welcome to the Justice in Heels podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Hayward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for season 4 of the podcast. This season will focus on compliance-related topics, and the goal is to simplify compliance for business owners. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another season of the Justice in Heels podcast. This season will focus on compliance-related matters, and today I am joined by a B-BBEE expert, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you guys because I'm afraid that I will butcher her beautiful name. Hi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. So I can see on the video, it's my full name, Gcinile. So a lot of people know me as Gcina, so that's the short of Gcinile. I am Gcina Mahlaba. I am a triple BE expert as well as ESG and sustainability. I've been in the space for more than 15 years. I've worked as a consultant. I've worked in corporate as a corporate practitioner on BEE matters, and I've done a number of triple BEE audits.
Thank you so much for that. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Can you maybe just tell us how did you actually get into the triple BEE space?
Let me tell you, it was by pure accident. I was in sales for the longest time, and I had left my previous company to work as an administrator, and they were looking for a triple BE champion. And fortunately, it was still new for the company and it was new for me. So I was able, honestly, I literally read the codes. That's how I learned reading and implementing and advising, because these people say, we brought you here, we gave you the codes, now guide us. Like literally thrown in the deep, and the company was also involved at the Kusile power station. So I was not only responsible for the BE, I was responsible for enterprise development as well as the SCD champion. Yeah, so it was by pure accident, and since then I stayed.
Oh, that's super interesting. And I love that you actually say that this was something that you ended up by pure accident. Because that's
Yeah,
also how I ended in compliance, to be honest. It was something that I was always interested in, but I didn't really know that it was called compliance. I knew
yeah.
that I wanted to work in law and I wanted to work in like with companies specifically, but I didn't really know what that meant. And then
Yes.
this opportunity also just like
Yeah.
came on my path, and yeah, I just took full advantage of it. So I
It is
just
very
love that I'm
interesting
not
how
the
we
only
get
one with a
parts.
similar story.
Yeah, it is very interesting how we find something and it takes us via a different route. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, so can you maybe just tell our listeners, and this will mainly be business owners, what
Yes.
are the main types of triple BEE legislation that they should look out for?
Okay, so I will start mainly before the BE legislation. There's legislation that support triple BE, and it's legislations that have been around longer than the triple BE legislation, and that's the Employment Equity Act. So it's important to have your workplace skills plan in place, your employment equity reporting, and then there's a skills development legislation. With the triple BE legislation, we saw that in 2003, we had legislation, which was the triple BEE, not the codes, but the triple BE first legislation in 2003. And then 4 years later, so it was the Triple BE Act in 2003, and companies at that time were not required. There was no measure, so we didn't have the codes. So companies would write reports, and it would be mainly on ACD compliance. We've done this, we've done that. And then in 2007, we had the codes of good practice. Now we had a measure. And that's how we started to measure. And with the codes has different levels and has different points for compliance. You have level 1 up to level 8 and non-compliance. And then in 2009, we had the legislation for the different other codes. So that's when we have the construction sector codes. So that's when the legislation was divided into each sector. And that's where, BE was based on the applicable sector. And that's why we have different requirements for different sectors. And then we moved along, and then in 2013, the codes were amended. And that has been the last amendment since then. So they were amended in 2013 and they were applicable in 2015. So ever since we get information, we get updates from the BEE commissioner, but no change has happened ever since the 2003 Codes of Good Practice being amended. And just to add, over the years, we have the sector codes slowly aligning. The only sector code that has not aligned is the transport sector. The codes have not changed since 2009.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That's quite interesting. So I'm sure
It
you've
is,
also heard this a lot. I tend to hear it like at least like once a week, where people just say, "But why do I have to comply with this? This is just like another thing that I have to do, and it's only the government that gets something out of it." So can you maybe just tell our
yeah,
listeners why should you actually look at triple BEE compliance, and why is it something that you actually need to perhaps implement in your company, and why should you not see it as just like a ticking exercise, just to say,
yes,
okay, I did this, I did this,
yeah,
did this, now I can just like ignore it.
yeah. I would break it into two spheres. We have the quantitative and the qualitative. Most companies comply because they believe it's the right thing to do, and they will comply, and they will, do the strategies, and get the compliance. And some companies is more quantitative because they have contracts that are attached to this certificate. Not really attached, but it is one of the compliance requirements for that contract. And I'm not only speaking about tenders, because now you have other companies that needs to comply. And that's how the compliance works. If it is a requirement for my contract, then I will filter it down to my clients. So there's different reasons why people choose to comply. And I would say, and this is the advice that I always give my clients. Always look at your competitors, always look at your industry. If most of the companies in your industry, especially the ones that you're competing with, are hovering around your level 5 and 4, why chase a level 2? Why chase a level 1? If minimum compliance, which is level 8, will suffice, because I don't believe in businesses losing their businesses trying to comply. It's like we're rounding in circles. You're putting something in and then you're taking it out. So I always advise my company, if in your industry level 1 is a requirement and there's a huge contract aligned to that, then chase a level 1. So it's about what you put in and the returns that you will get, not only as an organization in monetary value, but in other spheres like having the right people, the best people in your employ.
Okay, so you've now mentioned very briefly the different levels that you get in BEE, but can you maybe just explain it in a bit more detail? What is it? What does each level actually mean?
Yeah. So I will create an analogy, and it's always easy to understand. So if I buy from you, let's say I buy something for 100 rands. In order for me to contribute to your scorecard, you will have to look at my BE certificate. So we'll start it at the bottom. If I'm not compliant, it means you can only claim 0%. That will call them our BEE ranks. So in zero. And then we move to level 8. And level 8, the recognition is 10%. So for every 100 rands that I spend with you on your BEE rands, your BEE scorecard, you can only claim 10%. And then your level 7 goes up to 50%. Level 6, it goes up to 60%. Level 5 is 80%. And level 4 is 100%. And that's why level 4 is usually the minimum, because it's rand for rand. You claiming what you actually spent. And then as you go up to level 3, then you're able to claim 125%. So 125 percent. And in our analogy, it means you're claiming 125 BE rands. And your level 2, it's 120, it's 115. Level 3, 125, and you get the top. Those levels, there is caps, because with the codes you have 6 to 7 elements, and all those elements has maximum points that you can get. And then there's another spin where we have your priority elements. Now it adds a bit of a challenge. I think when as we go on, I will explain that in more detail.
Okay. So, I mean, can you maybe then explain what is the difference between a BEE certificate and a BEE affidavit? And on what level would you need to have like which one of the two?
Yeah. So with a BE certificate, with the general codes, which is your generic codes, the requirement in order to be a company that has a certificate, your income, your revenue, your turnover has to be above 50 million. That's generic. And any company with revenue, turnover, income of 10 to 50 million, they are QSEs, qualified small enterprise. And then you have the below 10 million, which is your EME. Those are your exempt micro enterprise. So just on the generic part. So with an EME, the legislation that was changed says that an EME is required, only required to have an affidavit. Therefore, it means an EME cannot have a certificate and is not required to get a certificate. And the reason for that, it was to create cash and not to burden the small enterprises. So that's why all the companies below 10 million are EMEs. However, an EME with more than 51% Black ownership, they get automatic level 2. And any EME with Black ownership below 51% will be automatic level 4. Okay, so that's the EMEs. And then with the QSEs, there's an affidavit applicable for 100% Black owned QSEs. So they do an affidavit and they get the level 1 automatic recognition. And then 51%, then level 2 automatic recognition. And any company below 51% black, they're required to go through a full audit like a generic company, but the requirements are more lenient. They're not as stringent as a generic company. So that's the difference between the two. And a affidavit, any affidavit, we all know it's an oath. You are saying that according to all the information that I have and that I know, we are 100% Black owned and we are level 1. You get it commissioned, and that will stand in court as your BE certificate. So those are the difference between a certificate and a affidavit. And then you have other sector codes. For instance, construction, which will have different requirements than, because you have your BEP, so which is Built Environment Professionals, based on their revenue, and then you have contractors, and the requirements are different for both. The contractors follow the normal generic thresholds, the 10 million, the 50 million, and then the over 50 million. But the BEPs, the threshold, I just need to always double check, but it's less than 28 million. So if you're over that, then in BEP terms, you're generic. So then you have those different sector requirements. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So, Gine, can you maybe tell us, as a BEE expert, can you then help companies to make sure that they are BEE compliant?
Yeah, and that's what we do every day. That is my job, to work with companies and help them to comply. And not only to comply, also do it for the right reasons. And that's why I always say I will not work with any company that wants me to come and assist them to circumvent the codes. But what we do, we work with clients, we guide them. So we create a strategy based on the information that we provide. So a process would be we'll do an assessment as a baseline for our strategy. So based on the information they provide, then we come up with a strategy that will be applicable and based on their needs and based on the level that they want to reach. And then we also advise them how much it would cost, because someone can say, I want to be a level 1. And then as soon as they see how much it would cost them to be a level 1, they're like, okay, we'll just take just level 4 or just minimum compliance. So we work and guide our clients, and also not just only giving them advice. Triple B is very expensive. And you need to make sure that your hard-earned rands are spent correctly. And not only that, they will meet the verification test. Because I've seen companies where they've spent hundreds of thousands and the recognition is not there. It's either they didn't have the right evidence, or they didn't spend correctly, or it was outside of the. So there's many reasons why organizations miss the points, and we guide them in that process. And one other thing that I have seen, and I believe that the B consulting industry would need to be regulated, because you have a lot of people coming out and advising companies, and we're talking about tenders at stake, millions of rands of tenders at stake, contracts at stake, and you get to the audit and they're like, no, this will not qualify. So with the stakeholders that we have, I always advise the client, if I'm not sure, I may be expert, but whatever I advise you still needs to be tested during a BE verification. And that's why I'm always in communication with the verification agencies. And if there is an issue that we are not sure of, we get the opinion of the verification agency and find out how will you deal or rate this situation. Because when we work with clients, we come up with a number of it's not, I wouldn't say creative ways, but we work with them to make sure that the money is well spent and they
Mhm.
get the recognition that they need. Yeah. So it's always important. If you're not sure, speak to one or two, three verification agencies, get their opinion, and it will give you an idea. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
It's
Can
a
you
pleasure.
maybe tell us what steps should business owners take to make sure that they are actually complying with triple BEE regulations and rules?
Yeah. I have seen that with family organizations and small entities, they do not have the resources, to have a full-time triple BEE expert. And I would say consult. There's nothing wrong with using a consultant, and get a consultant that is reputable, that will advise you and guide you and walk the road. Because with small and family businesses, they're run by a lot of people that already have a lot of responsibilities. And
Mm,
then you add triple BE compliance, then it becomes a nightmare. And that's why I insist reputable. With corporates, most big corporates have internal transformation managers or transformation executives or your transformation board, or, they have people working internally, that are responsible for working with the company. But also every now and again, they also need advice and guidance from the BEE experts, whether it's verification agencies, consultant, SANAS, or the legislators. So before you take this journey is to look what are the requirements, how it will affect me, and how much am I willing to spend, and how important this certificate will be. And then you do the right thing. There was a lot of people that will help you cut corners. But in the long term, I always say a BE certificate, okay, it's not money. I will use the money analogy, but it's not like money. However, when you have a BE certificate, you can never know where your certificate will land, because when it goes out there, I request it from my client. The next person will request it for their client, and someone might pick up if something is wrong, and you might get a call from SANAS or the BEE Commission. So it's important to make sure that you avoid circumventing, and it costs more at the end, when you try to avoid. I always say, when you in quicksand, the more you move, the deeper you sink. Yeah.
that's a very good analogy, and I do agree with you. I think a lot of people tend to cut corners, and then in the long run, they pay so much money, and then they are so upset. And then you need to
Yes.
tell them, listen, but if you actually did this the correct way from the beginning, then this would not
Yeah.
have happened.
Yes.
But anyway, in saying that, so what are some of the common mistakes that business owners make when they are trying to comply with triple BEE rules and regulations?
I think the biggest one is waiting until the last minute.
Mm,
And everyone knows this one. And the last minute, I mean like 2 months before your financial period, that's already late.
mm.
And you get companies that would call you 2 days or even on the day of their financial year end. And during that day, they have to make sure that all the contributions are within that period. And now they'll be just throwing money. And you can just say, put in 100,000, put in a 300,000, you will get this point, you get so many points. And clients will do that. And what I always advise is regular monitoring. Even if you don't do it on a monthly basis, you can do it on a quarterly basis, where you monitor, especially your net profit against your targets. because net profit is not 100% known up until the financials are completed, but you need to have some sort of a correct estimate. And also, if there has to be spent for skills development or any other element, you still have enough time to do that, and you plan for it, and you make sure that, because if you do it last minute, sometimes it becomes a cash flow issue because you have to spend 900,000 in one day. But if you would have spread it in 12 months, it makes sense. You know, companies wait until late, and then I know they trust us as consultant, but I always say, get a reputable consultant, get the history, understand where they're coming from, and before you give that person your company, because you will lose points, and the consultant will like, I'm sorry, it has happened. I've cleaned up one or two messes uh, done by other consultants. And more important is to always keep abreast of what is happening and the legislation. And you don't have to be, full on, but just, keep your ears on the ground and just make sure that everything that you do, you keep record, because evidence, for any contribution, for any initiative, you have to prove it by having the right evidence with the right quantity, and that can be accepted by the verification agencies. I think those are my biggest four mistakes that companies make.
Okay. I'm so glad that you actually mentioned that business owners should also try and stay up to date with what is the current rules, what is going on in the triple BEE landscape. Because I think like that's something that I preach a lot on this podcast is people need to empower themselves. Just because you have an attorney doesn't mean you can just hand everything over and forget about it. Just because you have an accountant, you
Yes,
can't just hand everything over and then just forget about it.
yeah,
Even though you trust the consultant that
that
you
is so
use or
true.
the service
That is so
provider,
true.
yeah, you still need to know what's going on, and you yourself need to empower yourself with like knowledge. So I'm really happy that you said that as well. How is triple
Yeah.
BEE evolving, and should businesses try and prepare for it?
Um, I think I would send everyone to the Be Engaged website, and our new cover's already there. So we're looking at to be or not to be, and if triple B is going anyway. And from what we've picked up from the ground and from the legislators, triple B is not going anywhere. However, with that said, I believe that whether you think triple B is good or bad, we still need an empowerment legislation in the country based on the big disparities that we have. And I would say companies would need to prepare themselves by keeping their ears on the ground, always finding out what is happening in the triple BE space. Like I said, you don't have to be glued, but just to get an idea. For instance, the legal codes, there's a lot of things that have been going on. There has been disputes in the way the legal code should be implemented. So there's changes, and also with the amendments. The last amendments was in 2013, and everyone is looking to see if the codes will be amended, and also if they'll be more stringent.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners have also learned a lot from listening to this episode. Where can our listeners reach you?
They can reach me at www.transformationconsult.co.za, or G Mashaba. So it's G Mashaba at transformationconsult.co.za, or on 072 725 0691. They can visit our magazine website, www.beengagedmagazine.co.za.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it with your friends on social media and tag us. As this podcast has a legal element, just a quick disclaimer that all views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the firms, companies, or brands that we are associated with. Until next time, goodbye.